Liverpool are having a really bad season so far, and everyone has opinions about what has caused it. But in this video, I'm going to argue that underlying everything is their pressing. It's gone wrong. Why is that the case? But before we get to that, we need to talk a little bit about how pressing functions for Liverpool. So on the board in front of me here, I've just laid Liverpool out as they lined up under Jurgen Klopp when he first arrived at the club in 2015. He came from Borussia Dortmund in the Bundesliga, and he played a really exciting brand of football with a 4-2-3-1, where essentially what he was going to do is he was going to play direct attacking football with a gagan press, which is a very exciting word, which I think many people will know what it means. But in principle, what that looks like is in build-up, you're going to move the ball around the back, not for possession's sake, but because what you want to do is you want to find a situation where you can play a really direct pass into this middle area here where there's lots of players. And the idea is that you play the ball in here and you've got lots of players around the ball. You can do quick passing and actually just get a direct attack and score a goal in principle. But as you will know, if you pass the ball into this sort of congested area, the odds are that maybe one of the opposition players will pick the ball up instead. But this is not the end of the world for a gegenpressing team, because this is when your counter press can spring into action. So what you would then see is the players around the ball, really well positioned then to fall on the ball like this, try and win it back. And because the opposition are all out of kilter because of the attacking situation, the idea is that you win the ball back and then you are able to generate these quick passes then into an even more chaotic moment and then generate this kind of shooting scenario. But when Jurgen Klopp arrived in the Premier League, he found a couple of problems with this approach. Now, there were two main problems. The first one was that when you lose the ball to an opponent in the Premier League, because the talent advantage that there is in the Premier League, there was just much better players around the ball, and so the possibility was that your gegenpress wouldn't work, the opposition will be able to play the ball through, and then suddenly you're in a situation where there's lots of space to exploit in your back line. So if you actually do these really aggressive passes into the central midfield area, you can lose the ball and then actually end up being countered on yourself. The second problem that Jurgen Klopp found was that there were a lot of teams towards the bottom end of the table who didn't want to engage in these sorts of transitional battles because they knew if the game became chaotic, that was going to be in Liverpool's favour. So what they wanted to do was reduce all that chaos. They would sit down in a low block, they would reduce all of the space available, and they would just congest this central area where Liverpool wanted to generate chaos. So the problem becomes that he has a team full of really aggressive pressing players who are really good at attacking in transition, now having to approach the game in a completely different way. They have to think of really clever ways to break down these low blocks, possess the ball and do a completely different style of play that they've been doing before. Now, Klopp's solution to this wasn't just to tear up the blueprint and start playing in a completely different way, but what he did try and do was introduce a little bit more control into the play style. So whereas before he was doing this passing around the back and then looking for direct balls into the middle, actually what he's starting to try and do at this point is introduce more control of the ball, more possession, and the idea then is, yes, get the ball into those dangerous areas when you can, but more often than not, try and force the opposition deeper into these sorts of situations that we saw, and then have the players in place to be able to break down these low blocks in a much better way. Now, when you get into these sorts of situations, counter-pressing is still important. So it's not that the counter-pressing has completely gone away. The situation, though, has changed because before, counter-pressing was being used as a way of attacking. Jurgen Klopp in the past has called the counter-press the best number 10 in football. But now the counter-press is assuming a completely different function. So let's imagine that Liverpool are trying to break down this low block with a series of intricate passes to get the ball into space so the striker can score. But if they lose the ball here, they're in the same scenario as when they are gegenpressing in an attacking sense, which is they can lose the ball to one of these players and there's all of this space now in behind that can be attacked. And so your gegenpress now is performing a much more defensive service. It's making sure that these players can't get the easy passes out and the opposition can then exploit the space in behind. So for Jurgen Klopp's evolved Liverpool then, pressing performs two functions. It can be used in an attacking sense, but it also performs this defensive function too, stopping the opposition from being able to counter back. And so if Liverpool's press should fail, then you would expect that it would have an impact both in their attacking numbers and their defending numbers. And that is exactly what we find when we look at the data. So I've got two playstyle radars here for Liverpool. This is last season, this is this season. The first thing to notice is that these two radars are very similar. So if you look at the overall shape, you can see that Liverpool are playing a similar way this season to the way they played last season. But if we start drilling down into the data, we can see that this season, there's a few things slightly off. So let's look at shots firstly. So you can see here, Liverpool are second out of all the Premier League teams in terms of the volume of shot that they're taking with 16.5. If we go back to last season, we can see they're up at first, but there's a big reduction here. So they've gone down from 19 down to 16.5 there. And not only is the volume of those shots gone down, you can see that the quality of these shots have gone down too. So this season, Liverpool are at 0.11 XG per shot on average for all of their shots. But then if we look back at last season, we can see they were up at 0.13 XG per shot. So you can see over the course of a season then, Liverpool are now down in terms of the volume and the quality of the chances they're creating. Interestingly enough, if we look at direct attacks and the attack speed, they're very, very similar. So Liverpool are still attacking in the same way, they're just not generating the same kind of chances. And then across the board, we're seeing reductions elsewhere in the possession play as well. So possession is down, field tilt is down. Now field tilt is just the number of touches that you're taking in the opposition box compared to the opposition. You can see that's reduced as well. But it's not just in possession stuff, also out of possession stuff has taken a hit as well. And that shows up really well in the shots conceded column now. So these are the shots that Liverpool are allowing against their opponent. So this season, 10.4 shots conceded, which is much more than the 7.8 that they conceded last season. And again, there's been an increase in the quality of the chances that their opponents are taking. So 0.13 shots conceded last season, now up at 0.14, which is the highest in the Premier League. That suggests that Liverpool are allowing chances that really aren't great. Therefore, something is going wrong very badly. But of course, the most important metric here on this radar is PPDA. Now, PPDA stands for passes per defensive action, and it simply means the amount of passes that Liverpool are going to allow before they make a defensive action, so a tackle, for example. Now, obviously, the lower that number, the better, because you're allowing the opposition fewer passes before you're making a defensive action. So here we can see Liverpool first for PPDA. They're only allowing the opposition about 10 passes before they're going to make a tackle, and that's dropped down to 12 in this instance here. So Liverpool's pressing is dropping in terms of its intensity. Oppositions are able to have more passes before they're going to get tackled. And this drop in pressing intensity shows up really well if we look at it over time. So what I've got here is a 10-game rolling average for PPDA over the last 4 seasons. This is from Mark Carey of The Athletic. And as you can see, Liverpool really, really high in terms of PPDA until we get to this season, and there's a massive drop off here. Now there's a number of arguments for why this might be the case. We've already talked about how Liverpool evolved under Jurgen Klopp away from being a really intense side to a side that can control more, and that's meant that they brought in players into their midfield who are less intense pressers. So I'm thinking of players like Thiago Alcantara or someone like Harvey Elliott as well. Another reason is that a lot of Liverpool's more reliable pressers in midfield have gone old. So I'm thinking Jordan Henderson, James Milner, Jorginho Wijnaldum has actually moved on. And then we've got players like Fabinho, who has been injured a lot this season as well. So what we're seeing then is a reduction in these numbers off the basis of some of those factors. Now it's important to remember that a low PPDA isn't always better than a high PPDA. PPDA just shows you different styles of pressing. So some teams will press less than others. That's not the problem. The issue is that what we're seeing here then is a reduction from one style of play to another. And actually, we've got a few quotes from Jurgen Klopp which suggest this isn't intentional. This is a problem for Liverpool. So I've got a quote here from Jurgen Klopp after one of the recent games against Brighton, where he talks about this. He says, "We have a really brave way of defending usually, and when the timing in our defending is not perfect, then we leave a gap open. That was always the case, by the way, but because of the pressure we made on the boy on the ball, nobody really recognised it, because we closed it with intensity." So what Klopp is suggesting here is that Liverpool have always been quite risky in the way that they press, but because they've had high intensity in the past, it's not been a problem. Now that intensity has dropped, it's becoming a problem, and all of these gaps are opening up. And I've got a really nice example of one of these gaps opening up in a recent game against Brighton. So this is from the 3-0 loss to Brighton in the Premier League that we saw. So Liverpool here are playing this way down the field. They're wanting to get the ball out of their defence. They play it long. It comes to Jordan Henderson, who challenges for the ball with Lewis Dunk. And the ball is actually going to drop into this area. And this is where the first problem arises, because we can see here Estupiñán has a lot of space and there's no one in the press to follow up if the ball should come to him. So that by the time the ball does come to him, he has a huge amount of time to just get the ball under control, get his head up, see Evan Ferguson between the lines and play this pass here. You can see Karim Mitoma here pulling Trent Alexander-Arnold out of the way to make that gap even bigger. But if you look here, you can see that Liverpool have already lost the press and they're going to suffer as a result of it. And the ball goes through to Evan Ferguson. He has time to pick the ball up. Now you can see that Mitoma's pulled out wide and Trent Alexander-Arnold has had to move across onto Ferguson, but Ferguson has all the time in the world to just play an easy pass through the lines for Solly March, who then goes on to score. Now, Opta, the data gathering company, calls these kind of attacks direct attacks. A direct attack is any attack which starts in the attacking team's half, and then you spend over 50% of the time attacking, moving the ball forward. And in this attacking sequence, you can see the ball's just moved forwards the whole way. So this is a direct attack. Now, Opta have been kind enough to present me with Liverpool's direct attacking data in terms of the numbers that they're conceding against them. So let's just take a quick look at that. So 5 seasons of data, and we can see that roughly in the last 4 seasons, Liverpool are moving between like lows of 40, highs of about 60. You can see the per 90 numbers here, about the same, getting a little bit higher last season. But this season, we're only 19 games in, that's halfway through, 41 direct attacks against. If you double that number, you get 82. So you can see already Liverpool are conceding a lot more of these sorts of direct attacks, which suggests their press is not working great. You can see here 2.2 direct attacks per 90, and that's obviously much higher than the rest of the seasons before them. In terms of these direct attacks which end up in goals, we can see there was a bad season in 1920, but Liverpool are on course to match that this time around. And then if we break down the amount of direct attacks that are needed before Liverpool concede goals, we can see that season in 1920 was particularly bad. About 10 direct attacks would then result in a goal on average. Outside of that, you're looking at 20s, 40s, 30s, but now again, this season down to 13.67. That means every 13.67 direct attacks is resulting in a goal against Liverpool. So the problem we can see is that Liverpool's press is not working. It's leaving them out to be exposed in these defensive transitions, and it's causing a huge amount of problems. But it's not just the defensive numbers that are bad. Also, we have the attacking numbers that are bad. We've already talked about how Liverpool use a counter-press as a way of generating chances in chaotic game states. That gives them a lot of goals each season. But this season, we're seeing a drop in terms of the sorts of chances that they're creating like that. Again, Opta here giving us the data. We're talking about high regains here. So this is all the times that Liverpool win the ball in the opposition third, and from those moments, they can then go on to spring counter-attacks. You can see these numbers quite high, 6, 5, 7 last season, very high. Again, the lowest figure here in 22-23. They are going to be generating much fewer dangerous chances from those counter-pressing moments this season, and that suggests that their press is not working particularly well. So what can Liverpool do about the fact that their press isn't working? Well, we can already find an answer to that question if we look at the way that Liverpool are playing at the moment, because Jurgen Klopp has been quite outspoken in saying that his team are now trying to get back to basics, in his phrase, and the way that they've done that is by changing their approach to pressing completely. So on the board here, we've got Liverpool as they played against Brighton, and rather than doing this aggressive high pressing, actually what they've started to do is use a mid-block. Now, what a mid-block means is that you allow the opposition to have the ball when they're in the build-up phase. Push your players forward here. You're going to allow them to pass the ball around the back here, and the general idea is that you don't really engage with them until they reach the halfway line, roughly. It will be different for different teams. But the idea when the ball is passed one way or the other is to then try and force them into these pressing traps. So let's say that the ball is played across to the fullback here. We might see Cody Gakpo then close down the passing lane back to the player who's just played it to him, and he's going to then force this player into going down the line. But as you can see here now, Liverpool can all squeeze up on all of these players, force them into the sideline and spring a pressing trap in that sort of area. This is a completely different way of playing, because what they're going to do now is they're going to absorb pressure, they're going to accept that the opposition is going to possess the ball a lot, and what they're going to try and do is win the ball back in these sorts of areas and then spring these transitions to try and score from there. So Liverpool's pressing used to be their great strength, but in this season it's become their weakness, to the point at which they've changed the way that they're playing completely. And going forward, the big question is going to be, what is Jurgen Klopp going to do in the future? Are we going to see in the summer Liverpool bringing in a lot more players who are going to be better at pressing and go back to the old formula? Or is this something that represents a change in the way that Liverpool are thinking about playing football?
If you like this video, please consider subscribing to the channel. The Athletic is home to some of the world's best sports journalists, including journalists dedicated to each Premier League team, so every fan gets the coverage they deserve, not just the big clubs. And you can try it for free now for 30 days. See the link in the description.